What is remarkable is what Senator Booker was berating Director Patel about. He wasn't berating him for failing to do his job, but rather he was furious for Director Patel for successfully doing his job. For 4 years, the Democrats under Joe Biden had an open border that undermined the safety of every single American. They allowed 12 million illegal aliens to come into this country to invade this country, and every single day Americans were murdered, women were raped, children were assaulted by violent criminals that Democrats released. Now, Director Patel, I found Senator Booker's questioning really bizarre. He asked you, have you reassigned FBI agents from human trafficking to immigration issues? Director Patel, are the Mexican cartels that are bringing people illegally into this country engaged in human trafficking?
Yes, sir.
What the hell does it mean to reassign someone from human trafficking to immigration? The greatest human trafficking in the world has been over the last 4 years at our southern border. It is modern-day slavery that the Democrats still defend. They still defend those open borders. Mr. Patel, he also said, did you reassign FBI agents from protecting children to immigration? How many children have you found that were victimized by the open borders of the previous administration?
4,700.
4,700. And yet, oddly, I don't hear a Democrat here saying, gosh, thanks for protecting those kids.
35% increase year to date last year.
In a chamber meant for justice, the air turned heavy, not from law or order, but from outrage. Today, the Senate Judiciary Committee became more than a hearing. It became a stage for grief, fury, and political theater. When one of America's most polarizing voices, Charlie Kirk, was assassinated, the shockwaves tore through every corner of the nation. But inside these marble halls, the tragedy sparked something deeper, a reckoning over hate, speech, and the blurred line between activism and extremism. As FBI Director Patel faced lawmakers, the questions weren't just about one killer, they were about the soul of the country, about how far political divisions have gone, and who's funding the chaos spilling into our streets and campuses. Welcome to Behind the Podium, where we cut through the rhetoric and step into the storm. Because today, behind every word, lies a warning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I have to say, it used to be that to see theater, you had to go to the Kennedy Center. Now, apparently, you need only go to the Senate Judiciary Committee and see our Senate Democrats berating the director of the FBI, which, okay, it's not, partisan politics is not new in the United States Congress. But what is remarkable is what Senator Booker was berating Director Patel about. He wasn't berating him for failing to do his job, but rather he was furious for Director Patel for successfully doing his job. For 4 years, the Democrats under Joe Biden had an open border that undermined the safety of every single American. They allowed 12 million illegal aliens to come into this country to invade this country, and every single day Americans were murdered, women were raped, children were assaulted by violent criminals that Democrats released. Now, Director Patel, I found Senator Booker's questioning really bizarre. He asked you, have you reassigned FBI agents from human trafficking to immigration issues? Director Patel, are the Mexican cartels that are bringing people illegally into this country engaged in human trafficking?
Yes, sir.
What the hell does it mean to reassign someone from human trafficking to immigration? The greatest human trafficking in the world has been over the last 4 years at our southern border. It is modern-day slavery that the Democrats still defend. They still defend those open borders. Mr. Patel, he also said, did you reassign FBI agents from protecting children to immigration? How many children have you found that were victimized by the open borders of the previous administration?
4,700.
4,700. And yet, oddly, I don't hear a Democrat here saying, gosh, thanks for protecting those kids.
35% increase year-to-date last year.
All right, I want to shift topics. And I want to shift topics to what happened last week. Charlie Kirk was assassinated. He was assassinated because of his political views. We're living in a time of enormous division and tragically hatred, and hatred that manifested in evil that we saw last week. Now, the FBI, working in concert with state and local law enforcement, apprehended what appears to be, in all likelihood, the murderer. And you did so in just 33 hours. So I want to start by just congratulating you and the FBI agents and state and local law enforcement for successfully apprehending the murderer in less than a day and a half. In the wake of that assassination, we have seen far too many people on the left celebrating the assassination. We've seen Democrats, we've seen activists cheering it on. We've seen, tragically, teachers in high schools, teachers in elementary schools, university professors cheering on the murder of Charlie Kirk. You and I both knew Charlie well. He was a good friend. He was an extraordinary man. And I will say there's a great deal of discussion about what to do about it. Under our Constitution, under the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment, speech is protected. And that's true even for vile speech. Someone can stand up and say the most hateful thing, and it's protected by the First Amendment. Nazis and Klansmen can march in the streets, and even though their speech is bigoted and horrible and racist, the First Amendment protects it. Conduct, however, is not protected by the First Amendment, particularly conduct that is violent. Violent conduct that is threatening others, that is harassing others, that is injuring, or in this case, murdering others, is most assuredly not protected by the First Amendment. And so I would encourage you and the FBI to focus on conduct. Now, speech can guide you to those engaged in conduct. And I will say one question that I have and many have, and I recognize this is an ongoing investigation, so I don't want you to say anything that would compromise the investigation. But what can you tell us at this point about what evidence there exists of other individuals who may have had prior knowledge of this assassin's plans to murder Charlie Kirk on September 10th?
Generally speaking, we've interviewed numerous people, family members and friends, including the partner, to provide us with a detailed history of the knowledge he may have had, the suspect may have had prior to. We're still mapping out who, if anyone, was involved as an accomplice. As I said, the investigation is ongoing. We're also speaking to and going to interview numerous individuals online who were part of a chat group that was involved in this heinous assassination. And we're also going to work with our state and local partners out in Utah to find out what community organizations, if any, participated or had any foreknowledge of this information. But it's very much ongoing. I remind everybody that it's not even been a week since Charlie's tragic death.
Is it accurate? It's been widely reported that the assassin's roommate was a transgender man who was transitioning to be female, and it's also been reported that they may have been romantic partners. Is that accurate?
Yes, Senator.
And I assume the FBI is investigating. It has also been reported that there were transgender chat rooms that may have had some awareness of the plan to commit this murder. Is that accurate as well?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
It's been reported that there were chat rooms of transgender activists that indicated some degree of potentially of foreknowledge of this murder.
We're still developing that.
Do you have any information, the bullet casings, had on them both Antifa and LGBT wording on them. Do you have any indication of the source of those engravings and what inspired them?
As to the actual source, we're still developing that.
I want to encourage you in the course of this investigation, absolutely go after anyone who aided and abetted. But I want to more broadly encourage you, follow the money. The violence we are seeing is not purely organic. There is, I believe, significant money that is spreading dissension, that is spreading violence. Antifa. Do you believe Antifa is a terrorist organization?
I believe Antifa is associated with a lot of violence in this country. As to its designation, I'll leave that to the appropriate authorities.
So I would encourage the administration to designate Antifa as a terrorist organization, to go systematically after Antifa. They've committed acts of violence all over the country. And the shell casings have multiple references to slogans that Antifa has popularized. I believe there is considerable money funding it. I would note that I've introduced legislation called the Stop Funders Act. Stop Funders Act would add rioting to the list of predicate offenses under RICO. I believe the money should be tracked and prosecuted under RICO. And both the Antifa and Black Lives Matter riots of a couple of years ago and the pro-open border riots in Los Angeles and other cities of this past year, I believe there was significant money behind those riots. I'm not the only person who noticed at the anti-Semitic protests and violent protests on college campuses that many of the tents all matched. And so I would ask, would it aid your ability to prosecute these matters if Congress passed into law the Stop Funders Act and if rioting was added to the list of predicate offenses for RICO?
Yes.
Talk to me about the efforts of the FBI to go after the funders of the anti-Semitic protests on college campuses, the pro-open border protests in cities, and potential LGBT violence. Talk to me about the efforts to go after the money of those who are funding and promoting violence.
As I've always said, Senator, money doesn't lie, and we've been following the money. And so that's what we're doing, issuing lawful process to organizations involved with criminal activity, because the money's got to come from somewhere, and it has to be funded somehow. So we have extensive investigations ongoing into numerous organizations that are related to violent criminal activity.
Cutting off the money will make America much safer, and that is the core job of the FBI. And I thank you for doing your job.
Senator Patel.
The Senate Judiciary Committee chamber was supposed to be a place of order, reason, and law. But as the cameras rolled and senators leaned forward into their microphones, it felt more like a national confessional, a raw, unscripted moment when America's deep divides were laid bare for the world to see. Senator Ted Cruz began his questioning not with calm deliberation, but with a sharp rebuke. His tone was incredulous, his words surgical. He mocked what he called the theater of the hearing, where Democrats, in his view, were no longer holding the FBI accountable for failures, but were punishing it for doing its job. And that job, according to Cruz, meant securing America's borders, protecting children, and fighting human trafficking that has metastasized across the southern border. Cruz accused Democrats of moral inversion, being furious not at failure, but at success. His words struck a chord among conservatives who believe the border crisis is not just a policy failure, but a humanitarian catastrophe of historic proportions. What the hell does it mean, he asked, to reassign someone from human trafficking to immigration? It was a moment of raw political theater, but one backed by brutal numbers. The FBI director confirmed that 4,700 children had been identified as victims of border-related crimes, children caught in a web of exploitation, smuggling, and slavery. For Cruz, that was proof enough that America's southern border had become ground zero for what he called modern-day slavery. But then the tone shifted. The hearing's energy darkened, its focus turning to tragedy. Cruz's voice softened as he spoke of Charlie Kirk, the conservative commentator and activist who, as Cruz said, was assassinated because of his political views. His words hit like a jolt, not just because of the murder itself, but because of what it represented. The death of a man known for his fierce defense of conservative values had become, in Cruz's framing, a symbol of America's decaying civility. The senator praised the FBI for acting swiftly, apprehending the suspect within 33 hours. But his gratitude was underscored by a deeper concern, the climate of hatred that, he argued, allowed such an act to take root. "We have seen far too many people on the left celebrating the assassination," Cruz said grimly. "Teachers, professors, activists cheering it on." And that statement landed with the weight of accusation, not just against individuals, but against a culture. In his speech, Cruz drew a sharp distinction between speech and conduct, a legal and moral boundary that defines the essence of the First Amendment. Speech, even vile speech, is protected, he said, but violence is not. It was a constitutional reminder, but also a warning. When words become fuel for hate, the result isn't debate, it's bloodshed. The FBI director, visibly measured, responded with the language of law enforcement, methodical, cautious, incomplete. He acknowledged that the investigation was ongoing, that the suspect's background, associations, and motives were still being mapped. But then came the unsettling revelations. The assassin's roommate was reportedly a transgender man transitioning to female. There were whispers of online chat groups that might have known of the plan in advance. And there were reports, chilling ones, that the bullet casings at the scene bore engravings of Antifa and LGBT. Cruz seized on that point like a prosecutor locking on to motive. If true, he said, it pointed to something far larger than one deranged individual. It pointed to ideology-fueled violence. And behind ideology, he argued, lies money. Follow the money, Cruz urged. The violence we are seeing is not purely organic. He pointed to Antifa, to activist networks he described as domestic terrorist cells, and to protests across campuses and cities that he claimed were coordinated and financed. It was here that Cruz introduced his proposed legislation, the Stop Funders Act, designed to expand the federal RICO statute to include rioting as a predicate offense, allowing the government to track and prosecute those who bankroll violence. Director Patel didn't offer political agreement, but his response was notable. "Money doesn't lie," he said. "We've been following the money." That phrase, "money doesn't lie," echoed across the chamber like a truth too often overlooked. Behind every act of violence, every protest that descends into chaos, there are logistics, travel costs, equipment, communications, supplies. And, as Patel hinted, there are financiers, whether domestic or foreign, whose fingerprints may be invisible to the public, but not to the data. From the border crisis to ideological violence, the through line in Cruz's remarks was unmistakable: the erosion of accountability. A government, he implied, that has grown numb to its own failures, a justice system too cautious to call ideology by its name, and a political culture that no longer condemns violence equally, but filters it through the lens of tribal loyalty. Yet beneath the partisanship and the heat, there was a question, one that should disturb Americans of every persuasion. What happens when violence becomes political currency? The assassination of Charlie Kirk wasn't just an act of murder. It was a flashpoint in a nation already teetering between discourse and destruction. Social media flooded with polarized reactions, grief and outrage on one side, mockery and indifference on the other. It revealed a country no longer united even in mourning. The broader danger, as the hearing made clear, isn't just that people commit acts of hate, it's that entire communities begin to rationalize them. When teachers cheer a killing, when ideology blinds us to basic humanity, something fundamental in the civic fabric begins to unravel. Cruz's critics will call his rhetoric opportunistic, even incendiary. His supporters will call it courage. But regardless of political stance, his words tapped into a collective fear that America's divisions are no longer confined to debates, but are bleeding into violence. And amid it all, the FBI now stands at the center of an impossible task: to seek truth in a landscape where every truth is weaponized. This hearing, in many ways, wasn't about Charlie Kirk alone, or even the assassin. It was about what America is becoming, a nation where politics is no longer persuasion, but warfare, where tragedy becomes content, where every institution, even justice itself, must pick a side. Cruz ended his questioning with gratitude for law enforcement, but beneath that, a challenge to the entire system. Cutting off the money, he said, will make America much safer. Perhaps he's right, but money is only one thread in the fabric of unrest. Behind every riot, every shooting, every hateful post, there's something more primal: fear, alienation, and a loss of shared purpose. The hearing exposed that truth not through statistics, but through tone. Anger on one side, defensiveness on the other, and exhaustion everywhere in between. And as the gavel fell and the cameras cut away, the audience, both in the room and across America, was left with a haunting realization. The real theater isn't in the Senate. It's in the streets, in our schools, and in our hearts. Because before a bullet is ever fired, a society must first pull the trigger.